a big report rolled out this morning, and I was really pleased to hear from some colleagues that we got all A's. Well, at least we got one A. And I got to tell you, like, there's obviously more work to be done, and I'd be the first to say that in anything we do. But I do think that it's real validation of the efforts that this administration has put into ensuring we are moving towards strong authentication and MFA across the board, period, where there's been gaps completely. So I just want to thank the FIDO Alliance, ID Theft Resource Center, and Better Identity Coalition for inviting me here today to speak. You heard about the two jobs there. I actually have a third. I'm also an acting national cyber director for another division for the moment. So, you know, we call it the hat trick at the moment is the favorite joke for me. But actually that's, I'm here to talk with a different hat today. I was invited as a board member of the Cyber Safety Review Board. And I was invited to talk a bit about the lapses report. So for those of you who are tracking the CSRB, this was created in President Biden's executive order on cybersecurity, EO 14028, in May of 2021, and sort of modeled, one could say, off of the Safety Review Board, National Transportation Safety Review Board, and we're in the middle of our third review right now. And so the lapses review is our second. I think to frame how does that fit with the theme of the conversations you're having today, is it's a pretty good use case of making Andrew's presentation before this kind of come alive, because as we'll discuss, this was an effective campaign against some pretty big and sophisticated corporations, and they weren't necessarily the most sophisticated tactics, but they worked. And I think that is kind of why you see the hockey stick a little bit. That and other pretty big events over the past year, people are starting to understand that they really need to move faster. So. Before I get into that, though, just to kind of like a little bit, and one of the reasons that I was asked to be the board representative here today is I was one of the people that led the section of the report that was talking about the types of recommendations that are relevant to today, and in large part because we've been working on it since 2020, early 2021, and we've been taking this very seriously. We've picked a few metrics. MFA and encryption largely to really drive granularly on with agencies. And you can't metric everything and then hold senior government officials accountable for everything. And we picked these two for a reason. And we've been granular in understanding what types of MFA are implemented, breaking out phishing resistant MFA types, PIV and FIDO2 authentication methods. We've also broken out high value assets, which is like what we call our crown jewels. And that's a sophisticated program behind knowing like which systems matter more for lots of reasons. And that data has enabled scorecarding and business level conversations with deputy secretaries who are the COOs of agencies, and really driving forward risk acceptance discussions that have been going on in their agencies for years and maybe hadn't been understood that way due to the lack of implementation of these key controls. And it drove forward the other conversation we were trying to have about zero trust implementation. There's like a good conversation starter, scene setter, table setter on some concepts that kind of people could latch onto. And then we explained how it fits in that broader ecosystem of security modernization, which is what we term zero trust and put out our memorandum M2209 for the federal government. So that's like kind of our piece of that. And so enter the Cyber Safety Review Board. So how do we make our decisions on what we review? I mean, it's got to be something significant. And we've had very different themes. The Log4j large, massive vulnerability event, Lapsus, a group that appeared to have unsophisticated methods, but they were working way too effectively, and they were fast. And the actors behind them sort of very troubling, seeing a lot of youth involved, but also being, sort of meshed in with sophisticated criminal organizations. Like, what was going on here? So we've had to be kind of targeted in what we pick. But that is sort of what led us to decide to do this review. Let me just go quickly into that. Between 2021 and 2022, Lapsus conducted extortion-focused attacks against dozens of companies and government agencies around the world. And the CSRB's review of Lapsus focused on its exploitation of weaknesses in specifically identity and access management. Like, that was our main focus. and how they use them to infiltrate victims' networks for extortion, public notoriety, and financial gain. And we really did see kind of all three motivators through the various sort of distributed actor set that calls himself Lapsus. It's a loose org. These tactics, while oftentimes not complex, were extremely successful. And as a result, we knew that we needed to identify additional controls and improvements to change the status quo. And that is what we ended up doing and putting out a public-facing report. How did they do that, right? Like, one of the main ways that we saw be effective was social engineering to defeat pretty much every type of phishable MFA. And we really did see evidence of that, like all sorts of different non-phishing resistant MFA circumvented. They used some techniques that span from spamming employees with MFA prompts with the goal of overwhelming them with push notifications. In some cases, they would do that in the middle of the night, and the employee would just accept the prompt to make them stop. If you think about that, that's actually pretty effective. Threat actors utilize SIM swapping attacks. That was like a big piece of this, intercepting one-time passcodes and push notifications that were sent by SMS. And thematically across an array of the victims, we saw it was MSS, voice calls, push authenticators, et cetera, were all being consistently defeated, right? So that's kind of like our core conclusion. We're pretty clear that in our recommendations, we need to see some dramatic improvements in identity management, but we can't do it alone, right? Like, this has to be a whole of industry approach. And that's where we saw dovetailing on the kind of recently issued national cybersecurity strategy, right? Well, what did we say there? We say we need a fundamental shift of ensuring appropriate responsibilities on the people who are most resourced, the organizations who are most resourced to make security investments. And so that means big security companies and big corporations, government with lots of resources. We have a responsibility to do more to defend cyberspace. And part of that is a lot of the stuff you see that CISA's, secure by design, secure by default, importantly, two very different concepts together. But all of that stuff we saw needs to kind of double down on in this report and kind of tie these things together. So we outlined a number of recommendations. Some of them were, and I'm going to come back to context here in a moment, but using FIDO2 compliance solutions by default, transitioning away from SMS and voice MFA, and implementing secure by default safety mechanisms that protect authentication cookies. So, for example, online service providers could automatically and silently reissue cookies. I think we pondered like even every hour to reduce the window of opportunity for attackers to reuse, right? So what I want to come back to in the context there is like, we also deliberated a lot on like, well, we can see that clear future, we can see the need, we can see it's the answer, as the presentation before us, I think, was pretty convincing. And we also kind of understand that like, we have to meet organizations in a lot of places where they are today. And we debated rigorously, like, who are we talking about? State and local, small businesses, small critical infrastructure, municipal owned. I'm a former chief security officer of a state. I know a lot about this. But we needed to also be bold and state like a vision clearly and a threat statement clearly that like, that's also where we have to get. And I think that was the important thing, right? That we acknowledge throughout the report. And if you read it or reread it, you can see we are trying to thread that balance between having a very clear and definitive vision of what needs to occur and being clear on who needs to do it now and has less excuses. And, the fact that some will take more time. What I think is interesting about that, and you can find in the report, and it's maybe woven in a little bit, but I want to lift it up, is we talked a little bit about needing a secure authentication roadmap for the nation. And that includes standards, frameworks, guidance, tools, and technology to enable organizations to assess, progress, and implement leading practices for passwordless authentication. And like, what were we thinking about? I mean, a little bit we were thinking about sort of a capability maturity model type approach, right? That like some MFA is better than no MFA. Not everyone's lapse is coming after you. That is true. But there is a clear type of MFA that is unbreakable. I mean, what do you think I focused on when I was the campaign CISO? I mean, I had a no-lose moment there. And you are, depending on your organization, your risk tolerance level obviously is quite different. And how do you put all of that together was what we were grappling with to kind of, take a whole lot of good best practices out there, a lot of knowledge that we all have about this, a lot of instincts, a lot of experience we all have on this, but I have not, and we have not seen, and we studied it, something that kind of brings that together into a like, here's the MFA kind of like strength roadmap and like risk profile type, and then assistance and guidance on like how you can think about your transition, the challenges you're going to face, the preparedness and readiness measures you need to think through to be able to make that transition for your organization, a roadmap, right? And that was an important concept to us, in that recognizing that we were going to state some big, huge future goal, and like we'd want to be more interesting than just like leaving that vision on the statement on the table and saying, but yeah, also people aren't there. And I think that is still still an unmet opportunity that we've got together. And it is an opportunity that government certainly can coordinate. I mean, that's a huge opportunity of the organization that I've been privileged to be part of growing, Office of National Cyber Director, to now 85 people. You sit at the right hand of a president of the United States, you can convene quite a bit, but you cannot do for anyone. And I think that's why we love coming and talking to fora like this, because there are some unmet needs here. The hockey stick will grow. I love that number. I mean, if you get to that 20 billion, that's fantastic. But then like, what I'd also want to know is like, who is that, and like, who's out? And then how do we focus on understanding their needs and prioritizing the most important critical asset and service provisioners in that? They may even be local level, but like, that can be quite disruptive to a town when somebody goes down over a ransomware attack. And so like, how do we think about all of that is something that I think is like a great opportunity in front of us still. So, I mean, like that's kind of a lot of what I talked about. And I forgot to mention this earlier, but that statistic on the FIDO Alliance website, I think it's just like eye-popping, that the root cause of over 80% of data breaches is like passwords, So, wow, like we're still there. And I think that's just like really, really important. And it's why we've spent so much time pushing federal governments in the direction that we've been pushing them as well. And it's also something that like you may or may not know, but in our Zero Trust strategy, M2209 for federal government, we also put in there a push towards moving away from these like kind of arcane password management policies of like big, long, or complex passwords with all the characters and all these things that in the constant rotation, where just like, we all know why it doesn't work. And then moving towards these like passkeys and PIV, right? So we're pretty enthusiastic about this. We're leaning in across US government. I think we're trying to be leaders. We're certainly thought leaders. We're trying to also lead by action. I'm not sure if we're necessarily a global leader on leading by action, but we are certainly trying. And I think as far as governments are concerned, I feel pretty up there based on the conversations we have, and a lot of other countries come and we have great conversations around how are we doing it, and how did we even I've had that conversation with state officials, like how did we open up our policies to kind of start allowing this FIDO2 technology and to kind of enable and empower people to use it, and then how did we pay for it? It's something that I hear from most as well. So I don't know, I hope that this kind of just pull back to the Lapsus report and pulling it out. I appreciate Jeremy, thinking about that the way that I do too, is it really fits very well as a use case in how this matters, because Lapsus like flashed out of nowhere, hit everybody fast, and everyone was scrambling. I mean, it's easy to look back and go, but like if you were a frontline defender at a major corporation, like you were on your back foot for a little while there. It was a pretty uncomfortable moment for everybody. And I think that like part of the reason we did this report is to just like pull that moment in history out and remind ourselves that, hey, guess what? Like that can happen again tomorrow. Okay, like we haven't solved the root cause behind that being allowed to and able to occur at major corporations, at sophisticated government organizations that have invested a lot of money in cybersecurity. I mean, that's the main takeaway from like Lapsus. And I know a lot of people wondered like sort of how that get picked, but I think that was the thing. That was the distinguishing moment, that if you have a set of actors that at the end of the day may get caught, but seemingly don't have that deterrence built into their playbook, they can do quite a bit of damage. It's really a sort of an interesting differentiator between why a lot of sophisticated actors don't use such techniques. But when someone's willing to, it's like this group showed where the gaps are and the seams are, and how important what we're talking about today is to cut in between that and taking that gap away. So thank you again for spending some time listening to me. I love talking to these groups. I love the work that you're doing, and just appreciate being a partner in this community. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Chris. I know he's on a tight schedule and isn't able to stay to take questions. We have 1 minute till our next panel kicks off at 2. I did want to just clarify something with the SOC discussion that Andrew flagged, which I was perhaps a little too hasty in claiming SOC supremacy. Not that our SOCs aren't better in BIC thus far, but we actually got the idea from FIDO. FIDO did SOCs a few years ago. Which plenary was it? Maybe 2018. They were so comfortable that FIDO's event manager, Tasha, actually shared the name of their SOC vendor with us, which we've been using. The passkey SOCs have now appeared as a second version of FIDO SOCs. So it's really David's got them too. Those are nice SOCs. Yes, and to answer Ann's question, SOCs are interoperable. Yes, you gotta bring some FIDO swag. Anyways, let me now hand things over to my colleague, Heather West. We've heard a lot about AI today, I think 3 or 4 times already, but now we're gonna have a panel to really dive into all of it. So I'll let Heather introduce herself in the panel. Thank you.